Well, thank you. It's good to be here again today. I thank you for these opportunities. It's a lot of fun for me to be able to do it. And in terms of your Bible reading, I can tell you that the first time, I remember very clearly, the first time I read through the Bible, I did it just straight through. The thing that I remember the most, so I got done with the Old Testament, I started the New Testament, and it was the first time I got a emotional response to reading the Gospels in Jesus. Because in the Old Testament, over and over and over, the prophets say, "Thus saith the Lord, thus saith the Lord, thus saith the Lord, thus saith the Lord." And you get to Jesus and he says, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." I went, that's why they said this guy teaches with such authority. He really is the Messiah. And I got a literal goosebumps when I first read through that. Also, when you read through the text over and over, however you do it, you really do always get something new. You forget. It's a big book. You forget what's in there. And the second time you read the same passage, you're in a different season of life, and it strikes you differently. It hits you differently. It's been happening to me this summer over and over again. So I really commend that to you and pray that you do engage fully with it. Today we're in Proverbs 3. You can turn your Bibles to Proverbs 3 if you want. We are going to be looking at the whole chapter, but not in a typical way. Today I want to focus on what is by far the most famous piece of that chapter, which is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. But we're going to do something a little different. Let me tell you about it. First, I want to go back to when I was first thinking about doing a doctorate. This goes way back to 2005. I knew that I wanted to do something different. I didn't know what that meant. I started exploring what might that mean. Maybe we go back to school, started looking into that. Knew that I would go into a PhD program, but I realized that you had to take what's called the GRE, the Graduate Records Exam. I've never been all that afraid of tests, but I looked at it. There's only two main parts. There's verbal, which I thought, you've been a book editor for 25 years. How hard is that going to be? But there's also math. I don't like math. If I study it long enough, I can get it, but it doesn't stick with me, and I really have to concentrate. And so I wondered, do I take this thing or not? I called the school, actually, and they said, we're a communications school. We don't care about the math. Great. But in the sequence, you have to take something called quantitative methodologies. What do you think that's about? That's all math and statistics and so forth, and I was worrying about it. The prof has become a good friend. He is really, really good at it. He does it professionally all over the place. He and a friend of his go out all over the world and do surveys and that kind of thing. But sometimes people who are really, really good at something are not necessarily great at teaching it. Just like Michael Jordan would never be a good basketball coach. Magic Johnson would not have been a good basketball. I mean, it's that kind of thing. And I remember distinctly being in about the first month and a half of that class and going, I don't know if I'll be able to do this. And then he left for 2 weeks with his buddy to do some survey work in Asia someplace. They brought in a guy from another department. The first day, I went, that's what that was. That's what that meant. And over 2 weeks, all of us in the class, it wasn't just my experience, all of us got caught up. And it was largely because he was using clear, memorable examples and not just teaching didactically. And we got it. Examples and stories sometimes do a better job of helping us to get the material than didactic explanations. I want to do something like that today. Examples and stories sometimes do a better job of teaching a crucial idea than long explanations. So today, you're going to hear several stories. Also, we're in Proverbs 3 today, as I said, and I'd like to highlight, as I said, the most famous portion of it, which is verses 5 and 6. But then I want to go back through the rest of the chapter and see how those other verses tend to reinforce different pieces of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. That's our second primary emphasis today. In a way, to me, Proverbs 3 demonstrates how the whole book works. The book of Proverbs, I mean. It's not like a New Testament epistle by Paul, where everything builds on previous statements to make a complex point. It's more like a jar of marbles. They're beautiful. They're interesting. A lot of them are fairly similar, but they have little differences here and there. Certain marbles in that jar have very similar patterns and colors, and the book of Proverbs is like that. Certain key themes, like wisdom and trust and money and work, keep recurring throughout the book. And individual proverbs, those little expensive, beautiful, gorgeous marbles, add this or that nuance to the theme. All of them crafted in a beautiful and memorable way that urges the reader to meditate on that small piece of the larger theme. Does that make sense? Okay, let's pray. Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you that you are the Lord of glory, as we sang this morning. I thank you that you brought all of us here today, and I pray that as we look into your word, you might speak to us in a new way. Whether we need encouragement or instruction or conviction or whatever it happens to be, Father, I pray that you would do it, with myself included. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Proverbs 3. We're not going to read over the whole thing. We are going to be getting back to each verse, but let's start with 5 and 6. That's where I said we would start. This is the most famous piece probably in all of this chapter, maybe in most of Proverbs. Here it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." Let's look at that first phrase. Trust in the Lord, first part of verse 5. The Hebrew word for trust is bitach. It means to depend on. It's the same word that we see in Psalm 31:6. And there it says, "I hate those who cling to worthless idols. I trust in the Lord." In other words, they cling to idols. I cling to the Lord. That's what it means to trust. It's not just believe in, it's clinging to him. It's also the same word in Psalm 56, 3 through 4, where he says, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I trust. I will not be afraid. What can mortal man do to me?" Do you know that trust in God is the most potent cure for fear, regardless of what that fear is? This week, we just got a little bit of a sense of that fear again. I've told you before, I think, when I've been here, that way back in 1996, I got a stalker. I spoke at a singles group at a big church. And after that, I started getting these weird phone calls, and then she started showing up at my house at 1 and 2 a.m., thinking that we had some kind of a relationship. She was off her rocker. I got a stalking order. She violated it. She went to jail. She was in the custody of the state. This has been going on now since 1996. Whenever she goes off her meds, apparently this happens. Well, just this last week, I got a call on my cell phone, we got a call on our home phone, and yesterday Lisa got 2 calls on her cell phone. No, we didn't answer them. I called the police right away. She's not even in the state. If she comes back, there's an arrest warrant out. But that gives you a little bit of fear. You know what he says? It's that kind of thing helping you to overcome fear that trust in the Lord gives you. I don't know what she'll do. I don't know if she has any plans to come to Oregon. But he says, "I will not be afraid because in God I trust." Do you have that kind of trust? Do you cling to God? Does your trust in him enable you to overcome any kind of fear that you have? I have a good friend named El Broussard. Do we have these up? There we go. I was just at an event in Portland with him just in June. This is him on the right here. He called it rolling into influence. He's doing all kinds of things now that are raising his profile and helping people to lead better, and he's an amazing guy. He did not start out with an amazing past. I'm not going to go all into it. He was born into basically a cult. His sister was killed in front of him by the leaders of the cult, and they forced him to count how many times they struck her with whips and cords and hoses and so forth. It was 500 sometimes. She died. All the kids were dispersed. He went to a foster home. His father, who was the leader, died mysteriously a couple years later. He was in and out of foster homes, quit school at 10th grade, got into an incident in Portland, a shooting incident, ended up in jail. He might have been there for 80 years. Somebody took interest in him. Eventually, he went through this sort of restorative camp, although he got kicked out 5 times before. And at some point, his dad had made all the kids in the group memorize the whole book of Romans. And as he was going through it, he realized this is true. The path I'm on is not good. I have to change. His record had been expunged because he had gone through this thing, so he finally got a job at Costco. Loved the job, did well at it. They liked him. They finally came to him and said, "Would you be the leader of our loss prevention?" He was just about ready to quit the job. When they told him it would be a $2 raise, he said, "You bet!" Well, who is better at discovering people who are taking stuff than somebody who used to do it? But they didn't know his background. He rose through the ranks, he did really well, and then he was praying at some point, and he felt very strongly the Lord indicating to him, he didn't hear a voice or anything, saying, "It's time to quit." You know what that meant? He and his wife prayed about it. Shortly thereafter, it became clear it's time to quit at Costco. He only had a GED. He didn't have any plan. The Lord said, "It's time for you to quit to spend time with me." And he did. That's about the time I met him. Since then, his career, ministry, everything else has skyrocketed. The guy he's with is a nationally known skater who goes by the name of Push, who has, I didn't even know this was a thing. This I just found out a couple weeks ago. He's got like 350,000 followers on Facebook for roller skating. He's starting to use all of those things to expand in a way that's just unbelievable. Elle knows what it is to trust in God. Even though he didn't know what it would mean when he left Costco, he thought, I'm really putting my family in jeopardy. He's not the only one. I just did a book called, edited a book called Extraordinary Hearing. Next slide. See up on the upper left there? The guy who wrote it is the head of Pioneer Bible Translators. He was in West Africa for 12 years, translating the Bible into the Yolunka language. Yolunkas are a group of almost all Muslims, never had the Bible, never heard the gospel. He went there. One of the guys he worked with was Pastor Paul. This isn't a picture of him. This is just a picture of that area and what it would look like to go on a bicycle. Pastor Paul had a family, very poor. He had 3 goals in life. One was to build a brick house that had a metal roof. One was to plant some trees so his family could eat. And the third one didn't come until at some point in the harvest, when they're getting ready to harvest, birds come into that part and they take everything if you don't shoo them away. So for about a month, you have to sit out in the fields and shoo them away. This is what he's doing. And at some point, when he's shooing them away, the thought comes to him, he'd been praying, the Lord says, you need to go north and preach the gospel to villages where the gospel has never been heard. Could that be right? So he thought about it and he prayed about it. And at some point, it became a conviction he needed to do it. So he went with a friend named Bokhari, and they went north to this larger village that had never heard the gospel since the creation of the world. He went to the village elders. He told them what he wanted to do. He told them who they were. And they talked it over and they said, you know what? We don't want that religion here. We have our religion. So he and his friend left. 20 years later, there's a small church there that has become operating partly because of what he did. And the author says, I am looking forward to the day when I can talk to the people who have come to Christ in that area of the world that were affected by his faithfulness, and nobody knows about it. That's what faith, trust in God can do. Over here, this is a typical bedroom in West Africa. Same guy, years later, got sick. He lived at the bottom of the hill. My friend Greg lived at the top of the hill. And in the middle of the night, this guy's sister came running up and in a panic, it's dark, there's no lights, and she starts speaking his name. Greg, 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 Greg. He wakes up, and she tells him that her brother is sick. So he runs down the hill, and he finds him. He's unconscious. He sees blood everywhere. It's very clear he's going to die if they don't do something quick. So what does Greg do? He runs back up to his house, get his truck, his car, so they can take him to the hospital. He runs back down. They're trying to get Pastor Paul into the car. He wakes up, and he says, "Pray for me!" It had never occurred to Greg to pray for him. And he lapsed back into unconsciousness. They prayed for him. He started stirring. Of course, they continued to take him to the hospital. In these days, in the 90s, in this part of Africa, they gave him aspirin. Nothing else. No fluids, nothing else. Somebody from the church stayed with him all that night. They prayed with him, and he was healed. Greg says that taught him a lesson. In his Western mindset, the most important thing was get this guy to the hospital. In his mindset, the most important thing is that you pray. Why? Because he trusted in the Lord with all his heart. That's what this verse is talking about. Pray when he's nearing death. Look at chapter 3. You see something very similar in a number of other verses. First part of verse 3, let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. It's really talking about trust. Steadfast love and faithfulness is another way of saying trust. Don't forsake your trust in him. 7, the second part of it, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Fear the Lord is a synonym for trusting in him. When you don't trust him, you don't fear him. When you fear him, you do trust him. It's again building another aspect of that, what it means to trust in the Lord. Verses 19 and 20. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps broke open and the clouds dropped down the dew. Why can you trust him? Because he knows everything that exists, because he created it. So why wouldn't you trust him? Verse 26, the first part of verse 26. For the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. Why should you trust him? Because when you do, when your confidence is in him, he will keep your foot from being caught in evil. See how all those verses are combining to expand the meaning? But he doesn't say just trust the Lord. Second part of verse 5, trust the Lord with all your heart. Heart is the Hebrew word leb. It means your inner self, your mind and will and heart all together. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. All, the word is kol, which means everything. Everything that you have, trust him. And yet it's a mustard seed kind of faith. We see that word all and we think, well, I could never have all trust. It's not what he's saying that it has to be a perfect faith. Right after the disciples, 3 of them went up with Jesus to the Mount of Transfiguration. They saw him transfigured, what he's going to look like in the millennium. They come down. The other 9 had a problem with somebody who brought to them their son who was an epileptic. He was demon-possessed. They couldn't cast out the demon. They tried, it didn't work. Jesus said, bring him to me. Well, how long will I be with you, you unbelieving generation? He casts him out. And afterwards, those 9 come to say, why couldn't we cast it out? He said, this kind comes out only by faith. He means not just praying specifically. He means a lifestyle of praying. This kind doesn't come out except for that. And then he says, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Matthew 17:20. Mustard seed. Have you ever seen a mustard seed? Have friends who have little jars of them. They're tiny little things. You can't even hardly call them seeds. What he means is that it's not the amount of faith that you have. It's whether it's genuine. Is it real? Is it true? Does it go to your heart? When you have that kind of faith, amazing things can happen. Jesus tells his disciples that what they need is not giant faith. Tiny faith will do, but true faith. Faith, as D.A. Carson says, that out of a deep personal trust expects God to work. And it doesn't matter who you are. Do you know that only 2 times in the Gospels does Jesus tell somebody they have great faith? It's not the disciples. It's not his family. One is a Roman centurion, the oppressors, and one is a Canaanite woman, who at first Jesus in the story doesn't even talk to, because I was sent only to the lost children of Israel. Those are the only 2 people in the Gospels about whom he says, you have great faith. That is open to you. It is open to me. I saw this in my grandma, Grandma Olson. Here's the point I want to make with Grandma Olson. Real faith, true faith, biblical faith, trusting in God has huge this world implications. Huge. Her husband died at the age of 49, just a few weeks before he would have turned 50. They had 7 kids. They were on a farm. One of her daughters, her youngest daughter, died when she was 18. She was a school teacher. This is his obituary, 1948. She was a school teacher, taught in a 1-room schoolhouse, grades 1 through 8, for many, many years. That's her coming out of the restored school with my oldest sister back in the day. Next one. This was actually her. If you look way back, that's her. That's her classroom. Next one. That's the school that she was in. After her husband died and her daughter died, she wrote this poem. This is what happens, I think, can happen, when you trust God with all your heart. Doesn't mean that bad things won't happen. Here's what she wrote. May I keep sweet. Lord, keep me sweet when I grow old and things in life seem hard to bear. When I am sad and all alone and people do not seem to care. Oh, keep me sweet when time has caused this body, which is now so strong, to drop beneath its load of years, and suffering and pain have come. Help me to train my heart each day that it will only sweetness hold. And as the days and years roll on, may I keep sweet as I grow old. You can't write that unless you have a faith in God that is true and abiding. Grandma did all kinds of things with me. She lived up in Minnesota. She would come to visit us basically 1 time a year. What do we have going on there? We'll go investigate later. She came down, she took my cousin with me. She rode the train. It took about 10 hours to get from her place to our place when I had the lead in a play in high school. She was constantly doing things like that to show us her faith. I remember when I was real little, I don't know if I ever used this. She had really quite a sense of humor too. This was to put your stuff in. This is mittens, hankies, socks, and odds and ends by the dog's rear end. Get that? See? That was her sense of humor. I still have this. Why do you think I still have that after all these years? Here's a little, you ever seen one of these things? You don't see them very often anymore. There's a little New Testament and Psalms. Here's what it says in the beginning. Merry Christmas to Stephen from Grandma Olson, 1965. I would have been what, 8 years old? Psalm 103. So I have it marked in Psalm 103. This is what was important to her. It starts out, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgiveth all thine iniquities, who healeth all thy diseases, who redeemeth thy life from destruction, who crowneth thee with loving kindness and tender mercies." And it goes on. The whole thing is about blessing the Lord for the good things he's done for you. I learned an immense amount from my grandma. She is a person of faith. When she was old, I'm pretty sure this was when I was in college, she wrote me a letter. I don't remember this letter. I just found it the other day. I had to type it up because it took me a while to read her handwriting. But I want to read it to you. What is the one theme that you get most often when you read it? "Dear Steve, well, how goes it? I know you are much too busy to take time to read this note, but thought I'd let you know I'm still on the map anyway. I was going to sit out on the patio and write, but decided it was a bit too chilly. Not having been real well since January, I guess I better not take chances. I can't say I've been actually sick since I was out of the hospital. I better take care. We're enjoying the very pleasant weather, daytime, hope it lasts. There have been some pretty destructive storms recently, but none here thus far. I'm sure I don't know where you are half the time, but we'll take a chance that you are at school now. If you ever have time to just drop me a note, I'm due for x-rays and doctor's conferences the 15th of June. Sure hope the healing process will continue without any more trouble. And how are you getting along? Busier than ever, I'm sure. When will you be going home? Jody," that's my cousin, "finished today and she has done very well in school. Haven't heard yet what she got in today's exam. Angie finished 3 days ago. No, last Friday, I believe it was. I wish you could come and see us for a day or two, but I know you have a lot to do before you're footloose and fancy-free. I haven't heard from Mark's, another cousin, for a long time, but I suppose they're awfully busy like the rest of us, except me. Well, I'll sure be thankful when I get to be my old self again. Well, Steve, I know you'll agree this is a most uninteresting letter, but I hope you'll have time to drop me a line when you can find time. That's the 4th time. I suppose you'll have a busy summer, and I hope an enjoyable one. Bye now, God bless, and keep you safe and happy. Love, Grandma O." I don't remember if I wrote to her or not, but I don't think I would have saved that letter if I hadn't. Why did I keep that letter? Because she had such a profound effect on me, and now she's old and feeling like she can't do anything, and she wants to hear. Somebody's true faith, true trust has a profound effect on who we become. Trust the Lord with all your heart. Now there's a warning to that too. If you see Isaiah 29:13 and compare it with Mark 7:6-7, Jesus is quoting it. He says, "You people honor me with your lips, but what? What does the rest of it say? Your hearts are far from me." It's really easy to get into the rhythm of religious stuff. As good as Bible reading is, as I talked about it already, it's really easy to just get in the routine and it doesn't mean anything. It's just perfunctory. It's ritual. Jesus says, I want your heart, all of your heart. Corresponding verses, chapter 3, verses 1b. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. A permanent thing. And then he says, back to 3, 5, and 6, and do not lean on your own understanding. The Hebrew word lean is sha'an. It means to support oneself or to rely or to rest on. There's a text in 1 Samuel where it says that King Saul is leaning on his spear. That's the idea. Leaning on it. That's where I'm getting my support. That's where I'm getting what I need to stay upright. Lean not on your own understanding. Do not lean on it. Understanding here is the Hebrew word binah, which means discernment or consideration or wisdom or understanding. Now, I'm sure in this room there's a lot of people who are really, really smart. But he says, don't lean on your own understanding. Not don't use it. That's crazy. Don't lean on it. Who are you supposed to lean on? Is you're trusting the Lord. One of my authors in just the last few months is David Green. This is David Green. He tells a story about, he's the founder of Hobby Lobby, which is now an $8 billion a year business. He started it in the early 70s. In 1985, they had grown every year since he started it. But a recession hit, an oil bust hit, and all of a sudden he had overextended himself. And he tells the story, David Green, who's this icon of business, especially in the Christian world, hid under his mahogany desk for several days when he went to work. Do you know why? He was afraid to talk to anybody about what was happening. It looked like the whole business was going to go belly up. The phone would ring and he didn't answer it. Do you know why? Because he knew there were creditors. So when he's under his desk, he's praying to the Lord, and he says, the Lord put in his head, well, if you're so big, I'll just let you have it on your own. He says, I got proud. I thought everything I touched would turn to gold. I'd gotten promotions from the time I was young. And now he was saying, okay, I'll let you have it by yourself, see what happens. He humbled himself, and the thing turned around. That's his story, which he tells. There's a character in the Bible, next one. Do you know who that is? Peter. They see Jesus in a storm, or kind of a storm, dark anyway, walking on the water. They recognize him. Peter says, if it's you, tell me to come out to you. And he does, and he walks, and he's great. Until what? He starts leaning on his own understanding. People don't walk on water, especially when there's wind and waves, and he starts doing that, and he sinks, and Jesus rescues him. Not the only one. Regent University. When we went to Regent, I fell apart. I won't tell that whole story again. Peter was under the water. I was under the cloud of anxiety and depression. Mainly it was because I was worried about finances. Yes, I believe the Lord has called us here, but how in the world am I going to pay for it? And the second thing is, what exactly am I supposed to study? I don't know. I wound up in the hospital for 2 weeks. Why? A large part of it was because I leaned on my own understanding. Why shouldn't we lean on our own understanding? Because God understands and directs all the moving pieces. We don't. Back to Greg Pruitt. He tells a story of how he got to where he was. He's now the president of Pioneer Bible Translators. He wasn't originally. He originally thought he was going to use his civil engineering degree and work someplace with some unreached peoples, but probably not Muslims. He got interested in Rebecca. She rebuffed him because she had a very clear idea. She was called to be a Bible translator. He wasn't, so you're not the guy for me. Get away from me. She rejected him several times. They didn't know where they're going to wind up. Well, here's what happened. They were in France studying French because they thought wherever they were going, the people spoke French as a second language and they could learn the other language later. So they're going to cafes and having chocolat au pain and all this stuff. Meanwhile, in West Africa, there's a missionary who's getting ready to come home. His name is Kent. He's driving through this town where he doesn't believe there's any Christians at all, and he goes in his vehicle past this little corner, and there's a sign in French that says Christian household. Anybody else looks at it and they would go, huh, not interesting. Keep driving because I'm getting ready to leave. He starts thinking about it and going, how would there be a Christian household in this community? There's not supposed to be any believers here. He starts thinking about it, praying about it, decides he needs to go back. So he does, and it's an 8-hour trip. It's not easy. He goes back and he finds out that there is a family there. There's 2 people who are believers, and the young guy, son, who doesn't even live there, he's off away at college, got tired of all the Muslims in the area would go by their place, which is a central place, and always ask for water to get water and to wash their hands and stuff for their ceremonies. And so he put up the sign so that they would realize this isn't a Muslim household. He was also a believer. They didn't know it, but people in that community, in a very small church, had been praying that God would send them someone to help them reach their own people for Jesus. That was the thing that got it started. Kent goes back to France, talks to them, and says, I think I have the place for you. It's West Africa. Greg's heart falls because that wasn't my plan. That's where they ended up. They ended up there for 12 years. A Christian movement started, and it's spreading out now from there, from all over the place. He had no idea what was going on. God knows those things. It's why he says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding, because you don't know. I found this the other day. It was really about the Webb Space Telescope. I don't know if you can read it. Stuff you know, that thin, really green line. The next one, stuff you know you don't know. And the rest of it, stuff you don't know you don't know. That's why we don't lean on our own understanding. He does know. We don't. And yet it's not, well, it can be God's will only if it makes no sense. I've run into those folks. He doesn't ask you to turn off your mind. He says, don't lean on your own understanding. Corresponding verses, chapter 3, first part of verse 7. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Verses 11 and 12. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof. For the Lord reproves whom he loves, and as a father the son in whom he delights. If things aren't going as you'd like them, maybe that's what he's doing. He knows. We don't. Verse 21. My son, do not lose sight of these, mean the wisdom of God. Keep sound wisdom and discretion. Same thing, said in a different way. Verse 25, do not be afraid of sudden terror or of the ruin of the wicked when it comes. Why not? Because God knows what's coming. Trust him. Verses 27 through the first part of 31, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come again. Tomorrow I'll give it when you have it with you. Do not plan evil against your neighbor who dwells trustingly beside you. Do not contend with a man for no reason when he's done you no harm. Do not envy a man of violence, and do not choose any of his ways. Why not? Because you're trusting in the Lord and don't need to do that stuff. And then he goes on, first part of verse 6. In all your ways, acknowledge him. All your ways is the word derek, which means your way, your road, your journey, sort of your conduct. And acknowledge is one of the most common words in the Old Testament. It's yada. It means to know, and it's used in a lot of different ways. If you go all the way back to the first part of Genesis, it says, and Adam knew his wife. It's more than just intellectual knowledge. It's a deep experiential knowledge. The New Living Translation says, seek his will in all you do. Next slide. This is Pat Hickman. I'm doing a book with him right now. He just retired from this bank. This was actually the first branch that he built in a little town called Canyon, Texas. It's called the Happy State Bank. I told you a little bit of his story last week, how he had been a partier. He didn't become a Christian until he got to college. I'll rehearse just part of the story. He was at Texas Tech. He said it was at Texas Tech that he discovered beer and girls, and he liked both a lot. He was there 5 years. He didn't graduate because of it. He became a Christian shortly before he left there. He had gotten a job selling insurance and found out he was really good at it. Got a call one day from a guy who was running this from Los Angeles and said, hey, we would like you to take this, a lead position at this little place that's having a lot of problems. They didn't tell him all the problems. And he thought, great, where is it? He said, it's in a little town called Canyon, Texas. Have you ever heard of it? He said, that's my hometown. I don't want to go there. And the guy said, well, that's better than ever. You'll know the people. You'll know how to do it. Da, 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 da. He had just been praying after he became a Christian that he needed a girl. The 3 girls he was with were not good for him. And the Lord, as soon as he started praying that prayer, took all 3 out of the picture. This is about a week later. He ends up moving to Canyon. The place is a disaster. The guy is a crook. He steals money from his employees. So he gets there. He leaves school. He gets there. He's ticked. He's angry. He leaves the office. He goes walking to try to just calm down. He walks into this little shop, and he says he sees the cutest woman he's ever seen. That wasn't the language he used, but that's what he meant. He asked her out on a date. She said no. He said, well, how about if I buy this shirt? I don't need a pink shirt, but I'll buy this shirt if you want me. No, my mom told me about guys like you. He pursues her and pursues her. She keeps saying no. But he got hooked on Star Trek when he was in college. Star Trek in those days had just come on, what do you call it? When it's in its second run, what do you call that? Syndication. And it was on in that area 4 days a week. And he got to watching it, and but there's one show in the first part of Star Trek that had 2 parts to it. He'd never seen both parts. He finally started dating this girl, and it's a fun story in itself. I won't go into it. But he goes to her parents' house. His house, where his parents are in the country, doesn't even have cable, so he can't watch it. He goes to her house, and he watches it. And he watches the first part of this show that he's never seen the second part of. And at that point, he finds out that she's got a date with somebody else. And he gets so upset. He leaves, and he says, we're never going to date again. You don't have to go on this. She goes on the date anyway. He's just ticked, and he has a real temper. But he still needs to see the second part of the show. So on Monday, he goes back. He comes in, and he usually got there before she did. She got off about a half hour later. He sits down. She comes in, tries to sit by him. He gets up and moves over here. Doesn't say anything to her. He watches the show. It's called The Menagerie, I think. Great. He turns to her parents and says, it's been great knowing you. We'll see you. He doesn't say anything to her. He leaves. He's getting in his car. She follows him. She doesn't say anything. She starts bawling. And he says, that's not fair. So they make up. Eventually they get married, and it's been a great marriage. Time after time after time, the way he tells the story, and the way he tells the story of the bank as well, it's God's providence over and over and over and over and over. And he learned at the bank, and I've talked to enough of the employees at the bank to know this is true. If you tell them what's the P word, they'll all say providence. Because we saw it. He trusted in the Lord with all his heart. He did not lean on his own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him. That's what he did. In fact, this bank, you probably can't see it. I visited here when I was there. It's in Canyon. Right behind here, you can see there's a little plaque. You know what that is? It's Matthew. It's a portion of Matthew that says, worldly treasures are going to go away, but not those that you have with God. Those were on all his branches that he built. He put that on there as a way of this, acknowledging God. Back to David Green. David Green tells another story after his, next slide, after several years, the business now is doing really well. It's about a $3 billion a year business, but he doesn't know how to do it. So he goes in this warehouse. By the way, they have now, I forget what it is. It's 2 miles of warehouse that's under roof. They only have one warehouse, and it's in Oklahoma City. This is it. He doesn't know what to do. And he's almost crying, and he sits down in the warehouse, and he says, God, I do not know what to do. 2 weeks later, in the course of 2 weeks, God leads him to do certain things and to stop doing other things. Just one of them, they were selling some stuff at 40% off when they realized they didn't have to do it, made them $30 million. And their sales increased and their profit margin increased, which hardly ever happens, and they made another $30 million on that. $60 million. Because he said, Lord, I don't know what I'm doing. Show me. And he did. And the last part leads to that, verse 5. And he will make straight your paths. Make straight means to direct. It's the word yashar, which means to make smooth or straight or right in an ethical sense. Your paths is the word orach, which means your path or manner of life, life's pathways. The NLT translates it, and he will direct your paths. This is what I just talked about, but there's all kinds of illustrations here. One of them, again, is from Greg and Rebecca Pruitt. Next slide. This is Rebecca. She's the one who in college, he was pursuing her, but because he didn't want to be a Bible translator, she kept saying no. And so he finally thought, well, once we get married, then she'll do what I want her to do. They did get married, and he ends up being the Bible translator. Not only that, but he's now the president of that Bible translating company, ministry. They have some amazing plans of what's going on for translating the Bible in every language in the world. There's a coalition of now. We don't have time to go into it. The point is, when you do what this says, God does direct your paths. Now, it can look like this. When it says he'll make your paths straight, it doesn't mean that it's all going to be straight overall. Next one. But a straight line by steps. Each of those pieces is a straight line, but almost never, next one, almost never does God give you the whole plan at once. And it's because he wants you to learn to trust him. What's the next step you need to take? What's the next step you need to take? And he's not going to give you the next one until you do the first one. My own journey with Convergent Media has been like this. Next one. Kel's Convergent is the name of my new company that's going to be the whole Convergent stuff. It's hit some snags. It's hit some delays. It's still moving ahead. This is the main project we're working on. Next slide. Does God give dreams to 50-year-olds? Just a couple weeks ago, I was praying, Lord, what is the next step? And it came back to me as it had every single time. Get that finished. Get the MVP, the proof of concept. Get that finished. Why would he tell me more than that until I do what he's already told me to do? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. In all your ways acknowledge him. Lean not into your own understanding, and he will direct your paths. Jeremiah 10:23 says this, I know, O Lord, that the way of man is not in himself, that it is not in man who walks to direct his steps. Whose job is that? God's. And that's what he promises to do. I won't go into all of the corresponding verses here. We don't have enough time, but it's in verses 2, 4, 8, 10, 13 to 18, 23 to 24, 26, the second half of it, and 32 to 35. Let me ask, what journey are you on this month? Where do you want to go in your life? You know? You think you do know, but you don't know how to get there? Or you're just confused? You're looking at this. Where am I going? You know, there's a path. Not sure where it goes. I'm not sure what to do. What's the next step? If you are walking through life with Jesus, as I strongly hope you are, you don't have to worry about your future. You really don't. Even if today you feel uncertain, or confused, or frustrated, you really can have confidence and assurance to go out.
Yeah.
Sorry. You really can have confidence and assurance even when you don't have clarity and certainty. How? How can you have confidence and assurance if you don't have clarity and certainty? Well, what we've been looking at all this morning tells you how. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this text that has ministered to so many over the centuries, and they have found it to be true. So, Lord, I pray that you would instruct us today, you would encourage us today, you would move us along that path, that we would trust in you with all of our hearts, and that we would not lean on our own understanding, that we would in all our ways acknowledge you and believe and know that you will direct our paths. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.